Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I have in my hand the books, the complete works of Oscar Wilde. As you know, who is Oscar Wilde? Oscar Wilde is a very famous storyteller, playwriter, novelist and critic. He's an Anglo-Irish playwright. So I have today, my intention is to tell you about one of his best short story. The name of this short story is The Happy Prince. So ladies and gentlemen, Happy Prince, this short story is very fascinating, and it fascinated me honestly. And today you can see in this picture the statue of a happy prince. So Oscar Wilde had written this story, the short story. The name of the short story is The Happy Prince. Oscar Wilde, let me tell you about Oscar Wilde. He born in 1854 and he died in 1900. So he is the well-known Irish playwright, novelist, critic, Anglo-Irish, a short story writer. Is regarded as one of the greatest playwrights of the Victorian era. In his lifetime, he wrote 9 plays, 1 novel, and numerous poems, short stories, and essays. He born in 16th of October 1854 in Dublin, Ireland, and he died in 30 December 1900, Paris, France. So Oscar Wilde, why I had chosen this short story for this evening, because it is a very beautiful story, and this is the story of it dwells upon the social injustice, redemptive power of love, and loss of innocence. So the Happy Prince is the story of the statue. You can see a statue which is erected in a town high up in a column of the town, the statue of a prince, Happy Prince. So the Happy Prince, covered with gold and jewelry, fine jewels. It sits overlooking the city. It overlooks the city. It is erected high up in the column, and it sits and he can see the Happy Prince, all of the city. One day, the story begins with a swallow, a small bird, a migrating bird who came from Egypt with his friends. And since it is the summertime, and he used to fly here and play with his fellow birds. So now, since his other fellow birds had flown early towards his homeland, Egypt, and this swallow, he remained back. So the swallow, the little bird, the Oscar Wilde start his story like this. High above the city, on a tall column, stood the statue of a happy prince. He was gilded all over with thin leaves of fine gold. He was covered with fine gold. For eyes he had 2 bright sapphires, his eyes 2 eyes, and a large red ruby glowed in his sword hilt. So he was much admired. He is as beautiful as a weathercock. So the swallow who came from his motherland, and he used to wander here and there the whole day. During the night, when he started to look for the shelter, and he flew, the swallow flew to the statue, to the column of the statue of this happy prince. So what happened, that the story of the statue, the happy prince overlooking a day. One day a swallow bird seeks shelter under the statue and discover the prince not happy but sad. When the swallow used to, the drop of tears fell on the swallow. When the swallow looked up, he saw the happy prince who was crying. Though he was a statue, but he was crying. So the bird becomes friendly with the prince and tries to ease the suffering of each other, making happy the birds. Tries to making happy by assisting him in his desire to ease the suffering of others. Since the happy prince was erected high on the column, his statue, he can see the entire city. He can see the sufferings of people, those poor people. So during his lifetime, he was a happy prince. Through all his life, he remained in the palace. He did not see the suffering when he was alive, like Gautam Buddha. But when he died, his statue was erected on the high column. Now he sees the suffering of the people. So the swallow came there by chance and tried to assist the prince in his desire to ease the suffering of. He plucks out the ruby and the sapphire and other fine jewels from the statue, which is covered with the sapphire and gold, other jewels from the statue, and delivers them to those who are poor and needy. The lesson of this story, The Happy Prince, is the story of Happy Prince dwells upon the themes of social injustice, redemptive power of love, and loss of innocence. In this story, we came across a statue which is erected, as I told you before, of a prince who at one time a real prince. When the prince was alive, he was a happy person. The prince, so he lived in the palace and did not know about the human suffering. So what happened when he died, and he started to see up in this from this column, the statue is built on the top of the tall column of the city. The statue was covered with all of the leaves of fine gold, and there in his two eyes to sapphire, and a large and red ruby glowed in his sword hilt. The statue of the happy prince looked beautiful, and everyone in the city loved to see their prince. Since he was placed high above the city on a tall column, the prince was able to witness all the sorrow and suffering of the people. So when the birds during the night came to took the shelter under the statue of the prince, the birds saw, the swallows saw that the tear was coming out from his and started to fall on the birds. So the birds asked the prince, why he's crying? Which the common but the prince during his lifetime, since he was a prince, he was a happy prince. He did not see the suffering and the miseries of people. Now when he died, when his statue was erected, so he remained ignorant during his lifetime. This made the prince, once happy, very sad. His eyes got watered, and large drops of tears began to run down his golden cheeks. A little swallow, the bird who had alighted between the feet of the happy prince to spend the night there, became curious to know where did the drops of water fall from? He looked up and saw the eyes of the happy prince full of tears. The bird took pity on the prince and became ready to assist him in his desire to ease the suffering of the common people. So he became the messenger of the prince and agreed to remove the fine gold and jewels from his statue to distribute among the poor and the needy people. He started with plucking the ruby and from the prince's sword and giving it to the seamstress who had no money to feed her ailing child. Then he plucked a sapphire. Every day the prince, when he saw from the high column the needy people, those poor people, he told, since he could not move, so he commanded his friend the swallow to go and pluck out his ruby from his eyes and give it to the needy people. So every day when he saw the needy people, the poor people, he commanded the swallow to give it to the needy people. So the swallow plucked his ruby from the prince's sword and giving to those needy who had no money to feed and ear. Then he plucked a sapphire from the eyes of the statue and gave it a precious stone, sapphire, from eyes of the statue, and give it to the playwright who was poor to make fire in the winter to continue his writing. He also was very happy and feeling weak. One day the prince saw a match girl who was being beaten by her father for letting the matches fall in the gutter. The prince's heart filled with pity for the girl. He immediately commanded the swallow to pluck out his other eye and help the girl. But the swallow was not ready to do so because this would make the prince completely blind. On being insisted, he plucked out the prince's other eye, swooped past the match girl, and slipped the jewel into the palm of her hand. The little bird decided not to leave the company of the happy prince, since the prince became blind now. So the bird decided that he will not leave the company of the prince who had gone blind, although he will remain with him. Although the prince was not able to see the sorrow or suffering anymore, he knew it was there, so he insisted the bird to take off the fine gold from which his body was covered with fine gold he was covered with, and gave it to the poor. The bird followed his words and picked up the leaf after leaf of the gold till the happy prince looked quite dull and grey. Then the snow came, the winter came, and the poor little swallow grew older and colder, but he did not leave the prince. He sacrificed his life. He did not went back to his home, and he remained. He decided that he will remain with the prince since he's alone now. He got blind totally, his eyes was plucked out, and he became uglier and eventually grew weak and died. So what happened that due to the cold exposure and exhaustion of the weather, just at that moment, a curious crack sounded from inside the statue of the prince as if something had broken. It was in fact the leaden heart inside the statue of that prince that snapped right into two at the loss of the sweet and kind swallow. Because the swallow died, he could not resist the cold weather. Seeing his friend died, the happy prince's heart became cracked from inside, and he was no more beautiful and useful. It stood deserted. So the town councillor and mayor, when saw that this statue of the prince became gray and dull day by day, so they decided to pull it down, and then they melted in the statue in a furnace. But the broken heart did not melt, so they threw it into a dust heap where the dead swallow was lying. When God sees up from the sky, ask one of his angels to go and bring the leaden heart and the dead bird. God welcomed the two in his garden of paradise and deemed them beautiful creation. So ladies and gentlemen, the theme of this short story is love, compassion, sacrifice, and all part of the themes of Oscar Wilde in The Happy Prince. Conclusion of this story is the conclusion of this story. The Happy Prince shows the sparrow and the prince transported to heaven. He was transported to heaven. God transported it through his angel, and God calls them the most precious object in the city because of their good deeds. What made the prince cry? The statue of the happy prince was weeping because when he had been alive, he did not know any sorrow. But after his statue has been erected, he was able to see all the ugliness and miseries of the city. And even though he now had a heart of a lead, he could still feel the pain which made him cry. Ladies and gentlemen, The Happy Prince by, you can see the picture, very beautiful, the picture of Happy Prince, how the swallow is sitting on the shoulder of Happy Prince, and how he was erected. This is the story. The Happy Prince is a story of a sacrifice, the story of good deeds, and especially the swallow who had decided that he will not go back to his home with his fellow birds, and he remained with the statue of this happy prince, and he had sacrificed his life itself, even both of them. So this Happy Prince is the story of sacrifice, the story of a good deed, and love and compassion. Thank you very much.